This lesson is about being a good neighbor. Thank you for watching. I am Kevin England. Being a good neighbor is a bit of a multifaceted approach. In this session, we'll offer some guidance for properly placing your bees in respect to neighboring properties. We'll issue the first out loud statement that you must follow local regulations as they relate to beekeeping. And we'll coach you about some ideas for proactively dealing with contentious situations. Ask you to assess the impact of bee flight out of your property, and if all goes wrong, we can discuss opportunities to go a different direction for hosting your bees, and leave you with some final words for being neighborly and planning for your future. It might be until this moment you had not given it much thought about bringing bees into an apiary and the impact on the surrounding stakeholders. While honeybees are everywhere we live, they are not currently on the property in the manner in which you're going to place them. If we examine that statement a little closer, it means that you are directly responsible for the impact of bringing bees into that location. In the previous lesson, we talked about the fact that you cannot truly domesticate honeybees. As such, it is really important that you learn the biology of how the bees operate and how they can potentially impact the area, the surroundings, and thereby your neighbors. Human beings have been caring for honeybees on their properties in the United States for over a century. Thinking back to the late 1800s, early 1900s, you could concede that settling Europeans were much more likely to host a beehive along with their vegetable garden so that they could produce honey for their family. In today's society, where you can get a jar off the shelf at the supermarket, it's probably not perceived as a conventional norm to host your own hives. In fact, bringing a box of stinging insects on your property could be considered a risky act by some that have uninformed views of the potential dangers of beehives. In some cases, this may be right, and a property is simply not suitable to host a beehive. It is our responsibility to consider the dynamics and make good decisions. We also have a responsibility to understand what other beehives may be in proximity to the property we're considering and the potential impact to native pollinators. The overarching concern is that a beehive we place will do no harm. The easiest way to control that risk is to ensure that there are adequate buffers all the way around the hives, and especially in the direction for which the bees will go and forage. Pragmatically, the best tactic is to place them in the center of a property as far away from all the property lines that you can get. From a practical standpoint, that's almost never something that makes sense, and you have to fall back on ensuring that at minimum you provide proper buffers around your hives. This is a reminder of the previous lesson that you should understand the regulations and laws as they pertain to your state. Making sure that you adhere to those will be the best way to protect yourself should you get into any contentious situations with your neighbors. If you skip that lesson, it would really be a good idea to go back and give that a view, because this is an important aspect for making sure you protect yourself after you commit to bringing bees to your property. When assessing where you're going to set up your apiary, consider where the bees might fly. Think about how they're going to fly toward forage. It is extremely likely that they will leave the hive and fly towards open sky or the sun. This changes during the year. In the beginning of the year, when spring is here and the trees are not budded, they might find a patch of sky to fly to, but when it fills in with trees, for example, they might change the path. Start with the assumption that if you face your hive toward the morning sun or open sky, that's where the bees are going to go, and then consider that path and determine if you have any difficulties. Now, what you're looking for, does it lead over your neighbor's property, over their pool, over a busy sidewalk? Do the bees fly over a driveway where the cars are going to be parked and they'll potentially do harm to automobiles when they do their cleansing flights, which is a polite way to say when they poop? Now, bees don't always fly straight out of the hives, and sometimes you have to wait till you place the bees and then determine where they're going to fly, and sometimes you have to move them. That's just the way it goes. There are alternative ways to direct the bees. You can set up a fence in front of them and make them go up and over, set up flyway barriers and other things. You just basically have to assess the situation as it plays out and do the responsible thing when setting up your apiary. We'll talk a little bit more about this when we talk about placing hives in the next lesson. A critical input to placing bees is evaluating how you get along with your neighbors. If everything is good, then you have a decision to make about how much you care to share with them about what you intend to do. Most times, an open door policy is fine, a bit metered in some ways. That's a good way to go as it clears the air, but how you do it is personal preference. At minimum, a basic disclosure is the responsible thing to do, as they will certainly know in time if you're going to have bees on your property. In contrast, if you don't tell a neighbor and they discover the bees and dislike it, the conversation's not going to be very pleasant. Some might say, well, tough. It's private property and technically it's none of their business. When it comes to stewardship of beekeeping, this may not be the best way to proceed. You have no idea, for example, if a neighbor is truly at risk for a life-threatening encounter with stinging insects. That's rather rare, but it is not unheard of, and you would not want to be on the other side of that. Some neighbors will love the idea of it, and others are going to reel against it with every fiber of their being. If you have a bad relationship already with your neighbor, you could be rest assured that if they're perceiving having honeybees as controversial, this is not going to improve the situation. We will tell you that you're within your own rights, but know that these can become some of the most contentious conflicts one will ever deal with. Imagine the divide in the neighborhood with the neighbors picking sides. It really does happen. We would ask you to employ alternatives if there is a conflict. When this situation is not ideal, maybe the best plan of action is to host the bees somewhere else. Whether you live out in the country or right in the middle of a town or city, there are always opportunities somewhere in your neighborhood where someone has the correct situation to host the bees and would welcome the presence of hives that you are willing to take care of. Now, entertaining a third party while hosting your hives can be a headache, but most of the time people are thrilled to work with a beekeeper, and in our experience, suitable arrangements are almost always possible. You know, there's one other odd option if you're simply struggling to work out some sort of plan, and that's an alternative path to adopt a hive while you try to make other arrangements. There are a large number of operations that will sign on and let you adopt a hive so you can follow its care, and that might be something that appeals to you while you seek out a place to host your bees. Now, there's no requirement for any beekeeper to provision their neighbors with honey, but the fact is doing so goes a long way towards building relationships. Each time you take the opportunity to exchange some honey with your neighbor, you can have a polite conversation about how your bees are doing and how it's benefiting the neighborhood. Before I leave this slide, I want to suggest something that's akin to a nuclear option. I know of a beekeeper who got into a situation where they were forced with a decision to relocate their bees. It's not out of the question to have a bug out plan in your back pocket, meaning design a plan to expedite the relocation of bees placed on your property. Hopefully it will only be an exercise that you plan and put away somewhere, but it's not something that you're going to want to figure out on the fly. Think of some place where you can move your bees temporarily while you come to some other arrangements. We hate to even have to suggest this as something to consider, but in truth, it's probably a good exercise to walk yourself through. Reiterating what we said, it would be an intelligent decision for you to evaluate your neighbor dynamic and take the high road and do the right thing in every case. Not to put this on you, but occasionally bad neighbor situations occur, and that has a negative impact on good beekeepers because different constraints sometimes come of trying to resolve bad neighbor problems. It's almost always applied to beekeepers in a particular area. Not only does a bad neighbor situation impact you, but it could impact all the other beekeepers in your zone. If a situation is tenuous and you take the high road to overcome difficulties, you can be perceived as someone who's looked upon as a good model for beekeeping while being responsible for your zone. The last impression is to tell you simply to follow the rules, be a good neighbor, and enjoy keeping your bees. If for some reason a situation is not a good fit, look for alternatives out there and you could still make something work. We're going to follow this lesson with two really fun topics: apiary design and how to physically place your bees on your property. When that's all done, we're heading to the milestone of actually installing your bees in the hives through a detailed guidance and a step-by-step instruction. If you have questions or want some guidance about this lesson, you can ask at our next online session. You can also send an email to the address on the slide. If you're watching from YouTube, you can leave some comments below, and we'll say thanks for watching. We'll see you at the next lesson.